Hi there, it's Kristen from k.becca, and today I'll be showing you how to make cute print and cut Halloween cards that you can color with lots of different mediums. I'll be using distress inks and my new favorite, the Zig Clean Color Real brush pens. Before we get started with coloring, we'll need to make the cards. I'm using Silhouette Design Studio for this. I have the designer edition, but everything that I'll be doing is available in the free version as well. Since these will be print and cut designs, let's open the registration marks panel in the top right menu and turn on the registration marks. I'm using a Cameo, so I'll choose type 1. Next, we'll create the card base. Select the Draw a Rectangle option from the left menu and create a rectangle in the work area. It doesn't matter what size the rectangle is at this point, because we'll be resizing it to the exact size that we'll need next. Select the rectangle, then open the Scale panel from the top right menu and resize the rectangle to 3.5 inches wide by 4.875 inches high, which is 4 bar size, a little bit smaller than A2. Make sure that the lock aspect box is unchecked before you resize, so the rectangle will be exactly the size that you want. Click the Apply button to make the resizing take effect. After our card base is ready, we can add the graphics. And I have all of the command options and keyboard shortcuts that I'll be using in the next steps in a box over on the left of the screen. First, I'm going to open up the Little Frankie graphic from the This Is Halloween 2 digital stamp set. He's pretty large at this point, so let's resize him so he'll fit on our card. We'll go back and open the Scale panel, and I want him to be 1.25 inches wide. Make sure that the lock aspect box is checked, because we want him to resize proportionally. Choose Edit Copy from the top left menu, or hold down Ctrl or Command plus C to copy him. Then, click over to the file with the card base and choose Edit Paste from the top left menu, or hold down Ctrl or Command plus V to paste him into the file. Move him to the vicinity of where you want him to be in the final card design. Next, we'll work with the sentiment for the card. I chose the Let's Be Frank, You're Pretty Cool sentiment from the This Is Halloween 2 Phrases digital stamp set to go with Little Frankie. And we'll be resizing this the same way that we did Frankie. Open the Scale panel and make sure the lock aspect box is checked. I want the sentiment to be a little bit wider than Frankie is, so I'm going to resize it to 1.5 inches wide. Click the Apply button to resize. Then we'll copy it just like we did with Frankie. Click over to the file with the card base again and paste the sentiment into the file. Move the sentiment to where you want it to be under Frankie. Now we're going to line everything up. First, click and drag a box around all of the elements to select them. Then, open the Align panel from the top right menu and click Align Center. This will line everything up horizontally. Next, we want to line Frankie and the sentiment up perfectly on the vertical within the card. So we'll deselect the card base with Shift plus click, and we'll group Frankie and the sentiment by choosing Object Group from the top left menu, or by clicking Ctrl or Command plus G. Once that's done, reselect the card base and click Align Middle in the Align panel to line everything up vertically. We're just about finished with the card design, but first I want to copy the card base, so we'll have it again for our next design. I'll be making 4 designs total. After this, the only thing that we need to do is group all of the elements from the first design and rotate the design to fit better on the page when we print. To do that, choose Object Rotate from the top left menu, then choose Rotate by 90 degrees clockwise. Counterclockwise works too. Click and drag the card to fit between the registration area. The process for creating additional designs is exactly the same, so I'm not going to make you sit through all of that. Once you get the hang of it, you can make a bunch of different designs in not that much time. I think that I did all 4 of these designs in less than half an hour. After all of my card designs are made, I'm ready to print and cut them. But first, I want to talk a little bit about printing on watercolor paper, which is what I'll be using for this project. My absolute favorite paper for mixed media and watercolor is Strathmore Bristol. I love this stuff. I have a stockpile of it, actually. It can be a bit pricey, but I've found that art supply stores like Dick Blick or Jerry's Artorama online and big box craft stores like Michael's have big sales on art papers at least a couple of times a year, and that's when I stock up. I use the vellum surface version, but there's also a smooth surface version. I think that the smooth may be just a teeny bit smoother than the vellum, but they're both pretty smooth, which makes them perfect for printing digital stamps. The other major element in printing digital images for watercoloring is the type of printer that you use. You need a laser print or a print in another water-resistant or waterproof ink to work with any water-based medium, or the image lines will smear and you'll have a mess. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you have to go out and buy a laser printer, but if you're in the market for one, I've seen black and white laser printers with good reviews for under $100 on Amazon. If you don't have a laser printer and aren't interested in buying one, then you can always use Copic markers, colored pencils, or another non-water-based medium and print your designs with an inkjet printer. You'll still get great results. Okay, so before I can print, I have to cut my paper down to 8.5 by 11 inch size so it will fit my printer tray. I have to admit that I was somewhat nervous when I first started experimenting with printing onto watercolor paper several months back, especially since my printer doesn't have a straight feed option, but I've had no problems at all. And I have a relatively inexpensive Dell laser printer that's a few years old, so it's nothing fancy or special. Alright, so I printed all of the cards and cut them out using my Silhouette Cameo. I have some extra scraps, which I'll be setting aside for watercoloring practice and to use on future projects. Today we'll be coloring the little Frankie cards, so I'll set the other designs aside for now. First, I'll be coloring the background of the card using distress inks. I'll be using picked raspberry, peacock feathers, and chipped sapphire. And later on, I'll be bringing some pumice stone into the mix. Okay, so I've got my water and a paper towel for dabbing off extra watercolor, and I'll be using an acrylic stamping block as my palette. I'm using a number 8 round brush for this. I use this brush in a lot of my projects because it's a nice, not too big and not too small size. Before I add any color, I'm going to wet my brush and cover the area around the image with just water. And I've sped this part up a bit. I don't really work that fast. It's totally okay if you spread the water a little bit inside the lines or miss an area here and there. I'm spreading the water out in a loose, ovalish kind of shape around the image. I don't want to spread the water too close to the edges though, because I'm going for a more cut-out vignette kind of look, rather than something that covers the entire background of the card. When I'm finished covering the areas that I want with water, I'm going to smush my ink pads down onto the acrylic block so I have some color to work with. Then I dip my brush into the water and into the peacock feathers ink and brush it onto the paper. As you can see, the water that I applied earlier does a lot of the work for me. I try to get in pretty close to the outline of the images, and sometimes I do get some color inside the lines. But again, it's no biggie, because this is watercoloring and I want a looser, more organic look. You can always dab off any excess color or water with a paper towel like you'll see I do in a few different places. For now, I'm only painting to a bit below Frankie's feet, which is where I stopped applying the water earlier. I'll paint further down later. So after I've loosely mixed the peacock feathers and chipped sapphire inks around the image, I'll come in with a little bit of picked raspberry ink, which I love to use in these Halloween-y kind of skies because it mixes with the blues to create a dark indigo bluish purple color, and I love that for Halloween. I'm going to continue painting around little Frankie with all 3 of the ink colors until I'm happy with how the sky looks. When I'm finished, I'll take a damp paper towel and remove any extra ink that's left on my acrylic block. Then I'll add some pumice stone ink to the block. You'll see that I'm dabbing off some of the extra watercolor that's pooled a bit at the bottom of the image. Then I wet my brush and pick up some of the pumice stone ink and paint it onto the paper starting at the bottom of Frankie's feet. What I'm trying to create here is the suggestion of ground or concrete, something solid that he's standing on. The whole look of the background is more abstract, so I'm not really going for realistic here. Honestly, I'm just kind of winging it and trying to complete the sort of ovalish look that I started with the watercolor in the last step. Watercolor has a mind of its own anyway, so I'm just trying to go with it. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how this is looking, and I'm going to come in one last time and dab off some excess color that's pooling. Before I head to the next step, I'm going to let this dry completely. Okay, it's a couple of hours later, and the watercolored background is dry. I'm going to be using the Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens for the rest of the coloring. And I like to keep a piece of scrap paper or a paper towel nearby so I can brush off any color when I need to. I'm starting with Frankie's face, and for that I'm using 3 shades of green. I'll list all of the colors that I'm using to the right here, and below in the description or in the supplies area if you're watching this on my site. I'm taking the mid-green and brushing it onto his ears and along the areas where I think shadows would be on his face, neck, and hands. I'm still trying to get the hang of these brush pens, so I'm kind of shaky with my coloring, but I really do love them so far. The colors are so bright and saturated, and because they're water-based, they mix beautifully, especially on the Bristol paper. Alright, I'm going to speed things up for you so you don't have to sit through all of the coloring in real time. So after I'm done laying out the shadows with the mid-green, I'm coming in with the yellow-green and blending the 2 colors. These markers blend so well that sometimes I need to come back in with a mid or darker shade because the shadows blend out. I just kind of play it by ear. So you'll see that I'm coming back in on his nose and coloring that in the same way that I did with the rest of his face, with the mid-green and the yellow-green. When I'm happy with how the first 2 colors are blended, I then come in with my darkest green, olive green, and add that to the shadow areas to deepen the contrast. I blend that out with the yellow-green as well. And if I notice that the colors are getting kind of muddy, I scribble my brush onto some scratch paper until the color becomes clear again. That's one of the best things about these brush pens. You don't have to worry about ruining the color on the tips when you blend the colors. Next, I'm going to color his hair using 2 colors, light gray and black. I'm also coloring his shoes in with the black. I start by outlining the hair on his forehead with black, and then I come in and blend it out with light gray. I know that it looks like the paper is pilling a little bit in some places, and that's initially what I thought was happening too. But for the most part, this is actually teeny tiny puddles of color that haven't soaked into the paper yet. They'll absorb into the paper as the color dries, and you won't be able to tell that they were ever there. So I thought that his hair wasn't quite dark enough, and I'm coming back in with the black and blending that out some more with light gray to darken up his hair. If you notice, I went outside the lines on his hair and got some black onto his nose. So I'm going to clean that up by blending it out with the yellow-green, which was my lightest green color. I actually really like how this area came out because the black created some additional shadowing in this area. For his pants, I'm using dark gray and the light gray that I used for his hair. First, I lay out the shadows with the dark gray, and then I blend them out with the light gray. I originally planned on making his shirt a blue-gray, but you'll see that after I started coloring it, I realized that it would be too close in color to the background. So I decided to go with a purple magenta color instead. I went in and created the shadow areas with purple and blended that out with dark pink. And sorry, I didn't realize that I was a little bit out of frame there. I did go outside the lines a little and got some of the dark pink on his pants, but you'll see that I'm going back in and blending that out with light gray. I didn't think that this blended out badly, but I did go back in later and blend it out some more with the dark gray and was able to blend out that pink pretty well. Finally, I'm going in with orange and bright yellow for the pumpkin. I'm creating the shadows with the orange and I'm blending that out with the bright yellow. Next, I'm going in with the scarlet red and I'll blend that with the orange to give the interior of his little pumpkin pail a little bit more contrast. After that, I adhered the card front to a 4-bar size side fold card base, which is 7 inches wide by 4.875 inches tall, using a double-sided adhesive runner. And that finishes it. So here are all of the cards that I colored, and I'll be listing the Zig Clean Color Real brush pen colors that I used for the other cards in the description below or in the supplies area on the post on my site. If you like this video and want to see more like it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.